So I serve a number of different roles in the Connecticut higher ed landscape. My primary position is program manager for library consortium operations for the Connecticut State College and University system, where I lead and support collaboration across the consortium member libraries. An additional role that I share is as the chair of the Connecticut Open Educational Resources Coordinating Council. And of course, it's in that role that I'm here today presenting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the council, some of the initiatives we're working on, our funding situation, and plans for the future. So to kick things off, I want to invite, let's see, there we go. I want to invite you to use the chat window to maybe share a little bit about your experience with OER. Is this a topic that's new to you? Do you have a lot of familiarity and experience with OER? That would just be kind of helpful to kind of level set as we begin this conversation. So, it doesn't maybe a sentence at most to talk about where you are with OER. And while you're doing that, I'll share a little bit about my background. Um, and I'll start by admitting a major limitation on my part, which is that I am not an OER practitioner. My background is as an academic librarian, but I've never really directly worked with faculty to help them to implement an OER in a course. That being said, I do have a lot of experience in roles that support those who do the actual hands-on work with OER. And that experience started when I was an associate university librarian at the University of Connecticut Library and continued when I moved to the CSCU system in the spring of 2019. In the CSCU system in particular, I've had a lot of experience supporting OER through my membership in the in the CSCU OER Advisory Council. And now is actually a good time to address what is sometimes a point of confusion, which is that there are two OER councils. One of them is called the CSCU OER Advisory Council, and that's a council for within the Connecticut State College and University system. I'm a member of that council and but it's led by two of my colleagues in the Connecticut State College and University system, Haley Battaglia from Southern Connecticut State University, and Jillian Maynard, who's about to start a position at CT State Community College Capital. So they do a lot of fantastic work, but my primary focus today is on the statewide OER Coordinating Council, which you see the logo of there on the left of the screen. And so that's a little bit about my background. And we'll just take a look at chat. So someone says they're a newcomer to OER. Someone else says the same. Oh, you're all new to OER, so that's fantastic. And thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit about the wonderful world of OER and particularly some of the great things that are happening in Connecticut. So let's move on to my next slide, which is what is OER? So you're going to hear various definitions from different organizations and people who work in this space. The one that I tend to use, at least as a starting point, is that open educational resources are freely available, accessible, and openly licensed online and teaching learning materials that can be used, shared, and adopted. So basically, they are a no-cost alternative to traditional textbooks. Sometimes they look a lot like a traditional textbook. Sometimes they're a lot different, but they always save students money and they foster their success, basically making education a more open experience for the student. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more in depth about OER later in this presentation if that's helpful. So for the moment, though, let's jump to a little bit about the history of the statewide council. And let's jump back 10 years in the past. Here we see a photo. This is from September of 2016, and it's taken in Yukon Library's Yukon's bookstore. At the mic is State Representative Greg Haddad, and to his right is State Senator May Flexer, both of whom are still in office today. And the occasion is a press conference celebrating an OER pilot program. In response to the potential that OER offers for reducing the cost of higher education, this program had been created by the Connecticut legislature in 2015, and it had charged Yukon and the Connecticut State College and University system to work together to launch a pilot to assess and promote the use of OER in our state. There were reports that were released in 2016, 2017 that considered the impacts of the program, elaborated on the need for OER-related structures, policy, and funding, and included recommendations for addressing professional development needs and incentivizing the use of OER by Connecticut faculty. And then in 2019, the report's recommendations resulted in Public Act 19-117, which formed the Connecticut OER Coordinating Council. And along with that act, the state provided $100,000 in annual funding, which the council used to carry out its core activities. Due in significant part to the vision of a colleague named Kevin Corcoran, who he now works for the University of Central Florida, and the hard work of his colleagues, the council got off to a great start, launching a very impactful grant program open to all Connecticut faculty, and also hosting annual OER summits and conducting annual surveys of the state's colleges and universities. So for the first 3 years, the council was doing outstanding work, saving students money and making education more open in Connecticut. But then some bad things happened. Kevin took a position at another institution, and in 2023, for reasons that have never been fully communicated or explained to the council, the state of Connecticut completely eliminated all funding in support of OER, which as I just noted, initially was $100,000 annually. And in the same year, and in actually the very same legislative session where the state eliminated all funding, the state decided that it would be a good time to add a major new initiative to the council's charge. So through Public Act 23-151, the state charged the council with establishing a OER model policy that colleges and universities across Connecticut could use to guide their OER activities. This act also moved the administrative home for the council from the Connecticut Office of Higher Education to the CSCU System Office, though I want to emphasize that the purview of the council was and continues to be statewide. So we serve all of the colleges and universities in Connecticut, not just those that are within the CSCU system. So it was into this confused situation that I began my tenure as a member and chair of the statewide OER Council back in the summer of 2023. The council's members, which mostly consist of faculty and librarians and administrators across various categories of colleges and universities in Connecticut. The council was frustrated and demoralized. It had been doing such great and impactful work, and then to have all of the state's funding and support of that work taken away felt really like a slap in the face. And I remember there was a lot of reflection about, whether it was appropriate for the council to continue, if the state wasn't going to support us, Why do we want to invest our time and expertise? But we ultimately decided to push on. To the extent possible without funding, we made efforts to sustain the good work of the council while also redirecting some of our efforts to raising awareness about the state's divestment of funding in OER. So those awareness efforts included talking to educators, talking to administrators, legislators, other leaders in the state about the situation. It included testimony in committees of the Connecticut General Assembly, and it included really emphasizing in our legislative reports that the state should restore funding in support of OER. And I'm proud to say that the efforts were not completely in vain. We learned last summer that in the current fiscal year, in other words, the one that's just a couple weeks from being over, and then beginning next fiscal year, the council is getting $50,000 annually from the state. This was an important positive step for the council, and we owe thanks to everybody in Connecticut who spoke out about the value of OER. While the level of funding is still insufficient, it has been enough for the council to resume its grant program, which I'll talk about in a moment, and sustain core activities. So that's, in a nutshell, a very brief history of the council. And I'd now like to talk a little bit about the council in its present state. And let's start with the council membership, which are all of the folks you see on this slide. The council has no paid staff. Everybody is on this group because they recognize the value of OER and the importance of working at a state level to try to advance OER, make education more open and affordable. And so membership on the council is defined by the statute that formed the council in 2019. There are roles for faculty members, staff member, and administrators at each of the following institutions and institutions types. So there's a faculty member, an administrator, and a staff member from UConn. Same three people in roles for the Connecticut State University System, for CT State Community College, Charter Oak State College, and independent colleges and universities. And then we also have a role on the council for a student representative. And actually, as a side note, the role on the council for a student rep is actually currently vacant. So if you know any students at your institutions who they don't need to be experts in any way about OER, but if they're want to make a positive impact on making higher education more affordable for themselves and their peers, this is really an awesome opportunity for a student. They get to serve on a statewide council and get some great experience and make a positive change. So if you know anybody, let's talk offline. So since its inception, one of the council's main focuses has been on our grant program, which provides funding for Connecticut faculty to engage in a variety of OER projects. There are 4 different categories of grants, which you see here. A faculty member can write a review of an OER, and those grants are $500. They can adopt an existing OER with a $1,500 grant. They can develop supplemental materials like quizzes and test banks and videos and stuff. And we have a $2,000 grant for that. And then if faculty is interested in a more collaborative, larger scale project, we offer a category of grants called impact grants. And the amounts of those grants are kind of just dependent on the nature of the project. Each year, or earlier this year, the council awarded about 25 grants to Connecticut faculty that for projects that are occurring over the course of 2026. And our grantees represent a range of disciplines and institution types. And just to give you some examples, this is not a comprehensive picture, but here we see a faculty from Eastern who is adopting an OER in psychology. And then here we have a faculty member at Central Connecticut State University with a project for an OER in film studies. Here is an English professor at CT State Gateway adopting a Introduction to Comp OER. These are three folks from UConn who are reviewing OER options for some math for business courses. Here is another faculty member. I think this is a psychological science professor at Eastern who is actually received both an adoption grant and a supplemental grant. Here is another professor from UConn who is reviewing an OER on justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion in the United States. Here we see a professor from Eastern who's doing a review of an OER. And here is a professor from Connecticut College adopting an OER in biology. Here's a professor from WestConn, a history professor, who is developing a supplemental materials for an American history course. Here's a professor at University of St. Joseph adopting an OER textbook in a marketing course. Here is a professor at Central Connecticut State University adopting a OER for innovative leadership course. And here's a professor from Manchester adopting an OER or developing supplemental materials for OER and computer science. And here's a professor at Trinity College doing a review, got a review grant. So as you can see, quite a lot of different disciplines, different institutions that we are able to support through our grants. And those projects have all been really impactful for the institutions and their states. In the state, since launching in 2020, Connecticut's OER grant program has delivered significant benefits. A very conservative estimate would be that the program has led to a savings of over $1.2 million for the state's students, which is more than a 5x return on the state investment. Through the program, nearly 10,000 students have benefited directly from courses using grant-funded OER. And actually, those numbers don't even include the 2026 grants that I was just talking about and that were awarded earlier this year. So it's a large and growing impact that our grants have in terms of student savings. Beyond the grant program, another important part of the council's work is professional development. On March 13th, CT State Community College in Naugatuck Valley hosted the council's 7th annual and 4th in-person OER Summit. And so here you see a picture from that event, which had about 100 attendees and which featured a keynote presentation by Dr. David Wiley, who is one of the founders of the OER movement. So he came to Connecticut and gave a great talk about the intersections of AI and OER. Prior keynote speakers have included Bob Awkward from the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, Andrea Leno, who presented on an open pedagogy project at Connecticut College, and then Michael Thomas, president of the New England Board of Higher Education. One of the great things about these summits is just, I don't really think that there is another event in Connecticut that brings together this cross-section of folks in the higher education landscape. We have people from a broad range of disciplines, everything from CT State Community College to Yale. We have people across disciplines. We have librarians, faculty, academic support, administrators, all in the same room, all talking about ways to make higher education more affordable to students. So it's a really great event, and again, something we hold in the spring of each year. Another important area of focus for the council is our biennial surveys of Connecticut colleges and universities. We conduct these surveys to assess the status of OER adoption, identify barriers, understand faculty needs, and track progress over time. We conducted our most recent survey in the fall of 2025. I'll take just a couple of minutes to summarize some of the findings from that survey. But I encourage you to take a look at our most recent annual report if you want to go into more detail. But first of all, the respondents. So the council sent the survey to all of the colleges and universities in Connecticut, and we received responses from 20 of those institutions. And then 8 of those institutions also went a level deeper and provided a spreadsheet with data on their OER adoptions. One thing we found from the survey is that 80% of the responding institutions said that at least at some level there was some OER activities at their campus. Of these institutions, 40% say that they're in a piloting phase, 25% say they are building and supporting OER engagement, and 20% are evaluating options. Moving on to promotion. When it comes to promotion and OER awareness campaigns at institutions, faculty remain the primary target, and another important audience is libraries. Most efforts to promote OER continue to focus on affordability of course materials, student success, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility were also frequently used frames when communicating about OER. We also asked in our survey a little bit about funding. And unsurprisingly, most of the institutions do not provide funding in support of OER, but a few do make small pockets of funding available for awareness campaigns, capacity building, training, creation of OER, and use of OER by faculty. We also ask about area of needs concerning OER adoption and use. And responses reveal that OER-related needs are significant and diverse in Connecticut. The institutions identified 6 different areas where the need for support is either moderate or high. And the single greatest area of need is reward-based incentives for faculty, which, as I discussed earlier, is an area that the council's grant program strives to help address. To gather data on the use and impact of OER courses, the council provided all the colleges and universities in Connecticut with the template that you see here, and we asked them to populate it with institution-specific data from the 2024-2025 academic year. And based on the information that we received from the 8 institutions that provided data, students have saved roughly $3.5 million in the 2024-2025 academic year through the use of OER. And to kind of preempt confusion about that point, the dollar amount of savings that I'm citing here is different than the amount I mentioned earlier, which is $1.2 million. And the reason for that difference is that the $1.2 million savings is just for activities related to the grant program of the OER Coordinating Council, whereas the $3.5 million is for all OER activities at the 8 institutions that provided data about use of OER. So there are 2 huge limitations that I want to emphasize about the data I've just been sharing. One is that the perspectives represented here generally speaking, they only represent a high-level administrator perspective on questions of OER related needs. And with this kind of approach, we are not really getting the perspectives of the folks across the institutions who are actually doing the work, the ones who are actually doing the teaching, directly working with students. And so the council feels like this is an important gap. And this frontline perspective is one that we really need to really understand how is it that we best serve the state of Connecticut. So earlier this spring, we launched a separate survey that's geared at people rather than institutions. You can see the information here, and I know that's maybe a little bit hard to make out in the slide. I'm happy to share information later with you. So this survey is still open, and you don't need to be someone who has a lot of experience with OER. We're really looking for all of different kinds of perspectives and people who are coming from all different kinds of places, just to basically understand how can we be better serving the state. So hope you will consider completing that survey. Back to limitations. So I mentioned there's two big limitations of that statewide survey. I was just summarizing the results from the other limitation is that right now, different institutions in Connecticut are defining OER and related terms in different ways. So there's a lot of inconsistency in the data that we're collecting around OER. To address this problem, the council has developed an OER model policy, the document I made reference to earlier in this presentation. The development of this document is something, as I mentioned, that the state added to the council's charge in 2023. And essentially, the state asked for a model policy that colleges and universities could optionally use as a frameworks for supporting OER. Specifically, we were charged with providing OER-related definitions, recommendations concerning data collection, and also recommendations related to the presentation of information to students. In response to this charge, the council formed a working group with representatives from across the state's higher ed community, people in various roles from both private and public institutions. The group reviewed policies from other states, drafted language for Connecticut, solicited feedback on what they drafted, and then revised the document. And so we strived for an open and iterative process, and this process resulted in the model policy that was published in the fall of 2025. And I'm currently working to reach out to colleges and universities across Connecticut to encourage them to consider the recommendations in that model policy. We're not trying for a one-size-fits-all approach because we recognize that different institutions have different needs, different communities have different affordances and constraints. But to the extent that we can move together in terms of how we're collecting data, how we're defining data, that helps us to better understand what is the impact of OER in Connecticut. So the grant program, professional development, surveys, and our model policy, those are all things that I wanted to talk about today. To this list of council activities, I have one more thing to add, and it concerns automatic textbook billing programs. If you don't know what these programs are, they are basically instances where an institution establishes an agreement with a vendor through which textbook costs are built into the tuition and fees that students pay. They are often branded as equitable access or inclusive access, but it's debatable whether these programs really are equitable or inclusive. Here in Connecticut, there has been some adoption of these programs. Our flagship institution, for example, UConn has a automatic textbook billing program that's branded as the Husky Bundle, and a few other institutions in the state have also adopted these programs, and they're controversial. There are some people who emphasize the value of these programs, and others who feel that they're not in the benefit of students. There's also a significant absence of information about these programs that doesn't come from vendors. So as the council looked at this issue, we had a lot of conversation about, what the needs are, where does the council fit in terms of our charge and the selling of these automatic textbook billing programs. And where we landed was that it was something that we felt that the council had a beneficial role it could play. And that's basically in giving like a non-vendor perspective on these programs. And so we developed a fact sheet, which you see here: inclusive/equitable access, automatic textbook billing, and open educational resources. What you need to know. And so this resource, we developed it about a year ago, and we just basically encourage institutions to consider this information as you might be looking at these kinds of programs, and hopefully they'll help to make more informed decisions. So I now want to quickly jump to the future. I've talked about where the council came from, some of our current initiatives. Where are we headed? The first thing I want to talk about is we continue to strive to get full restoration of state funding. So as a reminder, as I said earlier, we had $100,000 annually when we reformed. The state eliminated that. We were able to get $50,000 back annually starting in the current fiscal year. But really, to realize the full potential of the council, we continue to recommend that the state fund us at the initial level of $100,000 annually. And so here you see a couple of OER advocates at one of our OER summits, and we've also got support in our efforts from the Open Education Association, which is kind of like a newly formed national association in support of open education in the US, and they wrote a letter in support of funding for our council. So another goal, model policy implementation. I already talked about that and the reasons why that's beneficial. And if you feel like you could have a constructive role in advancing those recommendations within your institutional context, I'd love to talk to you. So I'm happy to discuss that later. So I did a webinar back in January about the model policy. Here you see the URL where you can get a little bit more detail about what that model policy is and what the recommendations are. A third goal is to do a better job demonstrating impact. So as I said earlier, like everybody on this council is there on a voluntary basis. We have no full-time staff. And we strive to do a lot. And sometimes in doing all that, one of the things that we maybe don't do as much of a focus on as we should is just kind of communicating out the impacts of our work to the community we serve. My presentation here today is part of that, but there's lots of other ways we would like to be doing a better job to demonstrate our impact to the stakeholders in the Connecticut higher education community. Enhancing usage of GoPenCT. So GoPenCT is the statewide OER repository. All of the grant-related work that faculty do, the end result of that should be going into GoPenCT. But it's a really under-leveraged platform right now. So we have a project working with ISKME, which is the organization that developed the platform that GoOpenCT is built on, to develop ways to better use GoOpenCT. And then strengthen engagement with the Connecticut higher education community. So as I mentioned earlier, we were a little bit constrained because the statute that formed the council defines the roles on the membership of the council. But just because there are specific designated roles in the council does not mean that if you're not, a council member, you can't participate in the work of the council. During the academic year, we have monthly meetings. Usually, I think it's the third Tuesday of each month, at least in the past, at 1 o'clock. But these are meetings that anybody in the Connecticut higher education community is welcome to attend, and not just to attend as like a passive observer. I really encourage people to come to those meetings and share their perspectives. You're welcome to join some of the working groups who are like, planning our OER summits or doing work to plan our surveys or other kinds of projects. So if you're interested in becoming, engaged with the council, I definitely would welcome that. And we have a listserv. So CTOER is a listserv that we formed about, say, at the beginning of the fall semester last year. And basically, it's a way for us to be sharing out information with the Connecticut higher education community about the work that we're doing. And it's also envisioned as a way to provide inroads so that, like I post the agendas and ahead of the council meetings and welcome people to join those meetings. And it's also just a way to share information about OER related things that are happening in the state. So I encourage you to join that council. Here's the QR code, but I can also give you the URL. There's just a very brief form that you need to fill out in order to join that listserv. If you want to take a deeper dive into any of the things that I talked about in this presentation, every late January of every year, we publish a legislative report, which you see here, talks about all the council's work, and would really encourage you to take a look. It's not a dense, difficult document to read. We work with a professional visual communications designer. It's very browsable, and it gives you a great overview of the work of the council. So I am going to stop sharing at this